It's time to do a hype check for Daredevil Born Again. I've recently started rewatching Daredevil seasons 1 through 3, it being my favorite show. I'm just having my wife experience it for the first time. And with me rewatching it alongside her, it still holds up. It's hard to believe this show came out exactly 10 years ago. The Netflix shows were the second set of TV shows set in the MCU after the ABC shows like Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. and Agent Carter. Disney made a deal with Netflix back then, but once they decided that they could have their own Netflix, which manifested as Disney Plus, these shows got put into sort of a continuity limbo. I talked about Daredevil quite a bit in my previous two videos about Spider-Man, and I'll link both of them in the description. In my previous commentary about Daredevil, I said that I was going to talk about Born Again as if it's season 4 of a new show, and that's what this video is going to be about. The main characters' arcs at the end of season 3, as well as talking about previous supporting characters, and also speculate a little bit on how much will be picked up from it and still be incorporated into season 4. So just remember, when I say season 4, I just mean season 1 of Born Again. Basically, I'm very happy that the suits made a creative overhaul to make this new show much more organically connected to the previous 3 seasons, rather than being a soft reboot or a complete reboot, which may have been their original idea, and that was a bad idea. In my opinion, not only is Netflix's Daredevil one of the best installments of the MCU as a whole, but it is by far the best TV series in the franchise. That goes for all of the Disney Plus shows, and the other Netflix shows, and the ABC shows. Let's start the conversation off with the man without fear himself. So although Matt Murdock has already appeared in the current saga of the MCU, most notably in Spider-Man No Way Home and She-Hulk, not that much of his story has been told. I think Matt's story arc over the course of the 3 seasons of his show was a tale very well told. Netflix did a good job of portraying his broken childhood, with his father Jack Murdock dying when he was a boy, and his mother, and then later his mentor, Stick, abandoning him. I liked John Patrick Hayden's portrayal of Jack, being the best possible single father he could be, along with Joanne Whaley's portrayal of Sister Maggie, and how the revelation of what happened to Matt all came together to him in the basement of the church. The death of Father Lantom was also crucial, and his passing was handled well. Fun fact, Peter McRobbie, the actor who portrayed Father Lantom, also appeared in Spider-Man 2 as an Oscorp employee. Now, there was one creative decision that I didn't really like. They decided to have Matt survive the blip, as we saw with his appearance in Echo. I feel like him getting blipped would have made more sense, because the Kingpin, who also survived the blip, grew his criminal empire so much in 5 years. It would have made more sense to believe that Daredevil was not around to put a stop to it. But Daredevil was around, so how did he not stop Kingpin from essentially breaking the promise he made at the end of season 3? I suppose this will get explained when the show comes out. The original run was going to have a whole 18 episodes before it was cut in half to 9, by the way. The other creative decision that's called into question is the tailor who makes his suits. She-Hulk aired probably when the studio had a soft reboot in mind, and had an original character, Luke Jacobson, be the tailor of his red and yellow suit. But after She-Hulk aired, we got the creative overhaul which would make Melvin Potter the original tailor. I guess this doesn't matter all that much. Perhaps Matt just decided that he couldn't trust Melvin anymore based on how he kinda betrayed Matt in season 3 and found a new tailor halfway across the country and requested to keep the design language of his suit. And the suit is pretty much the same, just with some yellow added to it. Or maybe Melvin will be back and they'll just ignore the fact that he had a different suit for a little while. One last thing I want to mention is that if you saw my previous video, then you know that I am a Weeknd superfan. Daredevil joked in season 1 about how he doesn't watch movies given the fact that he's blind, but I bet he's got a really great taste in music. So here's just me hoping for a fan service montage of Matt doing some ninja training or boxing training while listening to The Hills with noise-canceling headphones. Alright, next up is Kingpin. It's worth mentioning that Vanessa Fisk, who was originally portrayed by Ayelet Zurer, was recast to Sandrine Holt before being recast again back to Ayelet. It kinda sucks for Sandrine because she's also a good actress, so I hope Disney gives her another role in the MCU. Anyway, Vanessa Fisk is quite different in the MCU than she was in the comics because this version accepts Fisk for the evil man he is, and by the end of season 3, she even encourages him to continue his malice. That ultimately led to her and his first dance getting interrupted by Nadeem's video confession. So this causes the public to have a re-revelation of evil Wilson Fisk, which had already been done before in the first season. This didn't feel like it had that much weight because of all the things Fisk had done that had already come to light to the public eye to some extent. Like, who else were Matt, Karen, and Foggy trying to convince who hadn't already been convinced of Wilson Fisk's true colors by then? But I get that the most important part of getting Nadeem's dying declaration out there was to incriminate Fisk, again, along with Tammy Hatley, Nadeem's supervisor, whose confession corroborating his video being what led to the Kingpin's second conviction. More on Nadeem later. This was one of the things that I would have been fine with them retconning, to make Vanessa be more comic book accurate in that she is disgusted by his criminal activities. The current continuity also makes it impossible to bring Kingpin's son that he has in the comics, Richard Fisk, since in the MCU story, Kingpin and Vanessa met when they were much older. I don't know if Richard Fisk or Maya Lopez ever had any interactions in the comics, but since Maya is Kingpin's adopted niece in the MCU, retconning the narrative to have Kingpin have a full-grown son could have opened the door to a storyline where these two characters could come together to plot against their evil father. Kingpin's right-hand man, Wesley, was killed off in Season 1. We saw his annoyance with Daredevil, but it's a shame that his interaction with Spider-Man, which would be another level of headache for the person working for Fisk, is something we won't get to see. Something else I brought up in my earlier videos is that I think either one of the Spider-Man movies or one of the seasons of Daredevil should identify Kingpin as the secret buyer of Pimtech that we saw in Ant-Man and the Wasp. Reason being, that's still just another loose end of the MCU, one that has lasted for about 6 years now without a resolution. The only other thing I will mention about Kingpin is that it looks like they did actually retcon his strength. In the comics, he's not exactly superhuman, although he is shown to have extraordinary amounts of strength for a human being. In Hawkeye, he ripped off a car door with his bare hands. I don't think they showed him doing anything that crazy in seasons 1 through 3, so perhaps they did just make him stronger, which is a good thing in my opinion. I suppose this makes him as strong as Captain America or close, but naturally without the super soldier serum. Captain America in the 616 comics was peak human, as is Kingpin, but Captain America in the MCU was definitely at a superhuman level, even if it's on a smaller level compared to other characters. And I'd say Kingpin is probably on the same end of that scale as Cap. When the Daredevil reboot was first announced to be subtitled Born Again, a lot of fans were confused because the comic book storyline titled Born Again was already what Season 3 was based on. Back when Season 1 of Daredevil first came out, a lot of fans were also wondering what Kingpin's big plan was for Hell's Kitchen and for New York City as a whole. In Episode 5, there was this line,
"The city crumbles and fades. Needs to die before it can be reborn."
In flashbacks, we saw his abusive alcoholic father who he eventually brutally murders, running for the local government. My cousin, who I introduced Daredevil to back in 2015, guessed that maybe Kingpin's big plan was to run for mayor. And it turns out that he guessed right. So let's see how Kingpin as mayor of the city turns out. And we also got Bullseye. I was so hyped when they announced that Wilson Bethel would be returning in Season 4. He was a killer villain and antagonist to Daredevil in Season 3, and it's too bad this creative overhaul happened after the post-production of Thunderbolts. The whole Thunderbolts team as it is just a bunch of super soldiers, a Black Widow, and Ghost. Taking one of the super soldiers out, but adding Bullseye in, would have made more variety in the team. If Thunderbolts does well, maybe he'll be recruited later depending on his character arc in Season 4. Or maybe they'll also do a Dark Avengers in addition to Thunderbolts. I think that would also be comic book accurate, since Bullseye was a member of the Dark Avengers there. The season finale showed him in surgery with his spine getting laced with cogmium, so I would retcon this to be adamantium, seeing as how Disney has the rights to X-Men now. Being that he was so formidable in season 3, I think fans would be keen to see how much tougher of an opponent he's gonna be for Daredevil. He was hard to beat even without any cybernetic enhancements. Back in season 1, there was a character by the name of Leland Owlsley who acted as the Kingpin's accountant. Spoiler alert, but he gets brutally murdered later on. And throughout the show, he talks about the fact that he has a son. Seasons 1 through 3 didn't explore this any further, but given the fact that Born Again is more or less a direct sequel to the Netflix show, they have the opportunity to bring this storyline back and have Leland Owlsley Jr. become the villain, the Owl. It could be something like them showing him investigating how his father was murdered, trace him back to the Kingpin, swear vengeance, but Daredevil stops him from the murder, which then causes a problem between him and Daredevil. Just a thought.
Leland Owlsley is, a pretty different interpretation of that character. There have been a lot of fans who've noted that you've mentioned a son a few times, and could that be the Owl? And I do have to ask the "is he really dead?" question, because some other characters,
It doesn't look good for him.
Doesn't look good for him.
It does not look good for him. He was thrown down an elevator shaft and bleeding profusely from the skull.
Yes.
He is dead.
Okay, he is dead.
He is dead. Now, of course, if you know the mythology of the owl, Leland Owlsley, the Owl, had a father who was in high finance. So will his son Lee be the Owl? We'll have to wait and see.
Right.
But yeah, I was always fascinated by the fact that the Owl had a father in high finance. And, and we really wanted to play around with that.
So maybe he has a son who also likes the color green a lot.
It's quite possible.
It's possible.
All right, now we got Karen and Foggy. Season 3 really delved into Foggy's family issues and how it tied right into Kingpin's hand, and they also kept his relationship with Marcy Stahl, another original character, consistent throughout the whole series. More on Marcy later. Throughout the Netflix shows, Foggy's career seems to have been on the up and up, getting offers from other bigger law firms and whatnot, even crossing over to Jessica Jones territory a little bit too. But ultimately, by the end of season 3, Matt, Karen, and Foggy decide to work together again. That's a good note to leave off on, but the show was confirmed to take place 5 years after season 3. Unless Karen or Foggy or both of them were blipped, a lot could have happened to Nelson and Murdock, avocados a law, by then. As for Karen, in my opinion, her situation is a little tricky. A lot of people don't like her, and understandably so, because she has done some pretty shameful things, both during her character arc on the show and in flashbacks. Besides Charlie Cox and Vincent D'Onofrio, I'd say it's possible that Deborah Ann Wool is the most recognizable actress to come from the show, so bringing her and Eldon Henson back was definitely a win-win for the studios and the fans. Karen was also a supporting character in The Punisher, who we caught a glimpse of in the trailer, so I wonder if the two of them will cross paths here again. And another thing that I was hearing about was a rumor that Foggy and Karen were brought back only to be killed off. I honestly don't know how I feel about that. I feel like Foggy, having full knowledge of Daredevil's secret identity and yet still pulling off the comic relief of the show, still has some story left in him. So I hope Foggy is here to stay. Karen, on the other hand, I think with everything in her past, before and after Daredevil, death might be coming up to catch up to her. It would provide a shock to the audience for sure, but between the two, if it has to be one of them, I think people would rather have her die than Foggy. She was a love interest of Matt's, which ended up pretty badly and awkwardly, but if they need to have a character connected to the press, which I will also get to, Foggy can fill that role too. The more I think about it though, the more I would be fine with Karen being killed off, because after rewatching the show, she just comes off as selfish, untrustworthy, and reckless. A lot of people blame her directly for Ben Urich's death, which I understand. Ben was my favorite character in season 1, and we'll talk about him a little later. Karen has kinda been living on borrowed time, so maybe by season 4, she won't be able to outrun death anymore. And speaking of Matt's love interests, there is the most infamous one, Elektra. I liked Elektra's portrayal, and I might be mistaken to say that her casting was a fan favorite, but I think a lot of people would say that her relationship with Matt was really toxic. And I don't know if their relationship was comic book accurate, but then again, not everything in the comics is great to begin with. Sometimes adaptations have done things better. I didn't really like The Defenders though, and I know it takes place between seasons 2 and 3 of this show, so where we last saw this character, I don't know. Matt survived the collision, so I don't see why Elektra couldn't as well. I mean, these characters survive ridiculously dangerous situations all the time. I'm sure Elektra is still alive. Elodie Young has already expressed interest in returning to the role, but there were rumors in the past that Eiza Gonzalez was recast as Elektra, which of course she has denied. There was also a more recent rumor that Marvel is looking for a Greek actress for season 2 of Born Again, or shall we say, season 5. Honestly, if they're committing to have the show be a continuation of the Netflix show and they've already brought back so many familiar faces, they should just stay consistent and rehire actors at every given possibility, and so just bring Elodie back. It's important to note though that Echo is also a love interest of Matt Murdock's at some point, in the comics. I don't know if the MCU will decide to go that route though. Margarita Leviva plays Heather Glenn, Matt's current love interest, and that might have been her we saw with him in the trailer. Matt is quite the ladies' man, isn't he? Another love interest was Claire Temple, and I think she was definitely a fan favorite. Although her relationship with Luke Cage lasted longer than her relationship with Matt, I think Luke is destined to end up with Jessica Jones. Rosario Dawson was great in the series, and her character is also amalgamated with Night Nurse from the comics. She was the glue that kept all of the Netflix MCU together, and I think leaving the character out of season 4 would be another missed opportunity. I don't think she was in season 3, but she has been there for Matt for so long that I think it'd be unfair to ignore that history. It looks like Rosario has a good relationship with Disney too, as I understand it she's involved with Star Wars. There's also Ben Urich's legacy, and the Daily Bulletin. As I said, Ben, played by Vaughn Curtis Hall, was my favorite character in the first season, and while Daredevil was able to avenge his death, he was never fully avenged since the Kingpin made it out of prison. Interestingly, there is a new character with the same last name as Ben, being played by Janea Walton, and Wikipedia describes her as a young journalist. Maybe she's gonna play Ben's long-lost daughter, a daughter that his wife Doris sadly just forgot about due to her deteriorating memory. There is also the whole conversation to have about the Daily Bulletin overall. The reason the Daily Bulletin is what it is and not the Daily Bugle is probably because Sony and Disney were still in some sort of negotiating stage when Daredevil was being filmed. But the MCU now has an actual Daily Bugle in the form of dailybugle.net, even though it's meant to be a parody of InfoWars. But the studio could just decide not to do anything with the Daily Bulletin, but if they decide to make the Bulletin relevant, then we can have these two news outlets competing for credibility with the public. Ben Urich represented the honest integrity of journalism, while Jameson is just there for smear campaigns, which he has already been doing. We saw this at the end of Far From Home and in No Way Home, and it looks like there is no stopping him. Since the Daily Bugle is fully integrated into the MCU now, maybe they could just have Jameson buy the Daily Bulletin. That newspaper company went through quite a bit of trouble in season 3 anyway. I liked Robbie Robertson too, and it's sad that Bill Nunn is no longer with us. I also want to talk a bit about original characters and supporting characters, the first of which I mentioned was Marcy Stahl, Foggy's long-term girlfriend, on and off, who was played by Amy Rutberg. It seems like the chances of Amy returning to the show are kinda low, but I'd be very pleasantly surprised if they brought her back. When The Hollywood Reporter tweeted about Season 4's overhaul in production, she retweeted saying she has some recommendations. Maybe that was an inside joke meant to hint to fans that she'll be back. And while Royce Johnson, the actor who plays Brett Mahoney, was never officially confirmed to return for Season 4, he's been spotted with the other actors and has posted on social media looking in character again as Brett. Another character tied to Foggy is Blake Tower, who is a character from the comics. Season 3 ended with Foggy dropping out of the DA race and handing the position to Blake for the win. which I think was a good way to end that storyline. Blake also appeared in Luke Cage, and if the MCU will have certain IPs focusing more on New York City, then this gives the studio a reason to bring back Steven Ryder. No mention at all of him returning either, unfortunately. Some of the supporting characters I want to talk about are already dead, one of which is the character Julie, who was completely innocent being stalked by Bullseye. We eventually learn that he's not lusting after her or even romantically interested. He just appreciated her for her therapeutic nature. But she gets killed off, Bullseye discovers her dead body, and then he decides to drive around with it like a maniac. What really bothers me about this is that it made Julie seem like a plot device ultimately. The character's death did not really matter except to turn Bullseye against Kingpin. Of course, that means that her death did matter since the final fight was pivotal, but by the end of the show, she's forgotten. No friends, no family, no one cares except Bullseye the Psycho. Maybe the audience wasn't really meant to care, but I actually did, just like I did with Nadeem. Now this character was my crown jewel of Season 3. He's loosely based on the character Nicholas Menalis from the comics, but with the name change, he's very much an original character, just like Julie, just like Marcy. And as an Asian American myself, of South Asian descent at that, I absolutely loved the colorblind casting here. The race of this character did not matter at all, and I loved that. The fact that Jay Ali was able to nail this role proves that brown actors don't have to be hired only when the character's race is relevant. And suffice to say, Nadeem was a really important character, practically a main character in Season 3. I don't mind that his character was killed off, but I mind how it was handled. First of all, just from a cinematic or pacing perspective, Episode 12 should have just ended with his death. The scene of Matt, Karen, and Foggy with the aftermath should have just been the opening scene of the Season 3 finale. Second of all, leading up to his death was him traveling to the damn courthouse. He was being hunted along the entire way, but yet somehow that doesn't incriminate Fisk. And then it's just not really seen as suspicious to anyone how the jury doesn't convict Fisk. Now, I get that maybe that's just how the court of law works, but this is the MCU. Things should be a little bit different from reality if that's even how things would happen in reality, where a witness is obviously a target by assassins while he's literally on his way to testify. Nadeem was a family man, and the last thing we ever really got from his character was his wife, Seema Nadeem, faking her tears on a recording at the FBI office with Foggy. That's it, and I really didn't appreciate that. By the end of Season 3, there was a whole funeral scene for Lantum, as there should be, since he was there from the beginning, but there was that other scene with Matt talking to his mother about how,
And although people have died on my watch, people who shouldn't have, there are countless others that have lived.
what I would have appreciated is some follow-up closure to Nadeem's arc, because I feel like there wasn't one. This makes it feel like Seema, in her final scene, and by extension Nadeem himself, was used as a plot device just like Julie was. Except Nadeem in this case was a much longer lasting plot device. What Season 4 could do is have a flashback to another funeral scene, this time to Nadeem's funeral, and showing Matt, Karen, and Foggy in attendance, and one out of the three of them, or all of them, go to talk to her. Maybe the writers didn't think it was important enough to give Nadeem's family any closure, but I actually care about a lot of the original characters from the Netflix series. This goes beyond just Daredevil. I think the other MCU Netflix shows handled original characters poorly. Anyway, since Bullseye is gonna be brought back, there is an opportunity to make Nadeem relevant in the script again, since his send-off hasn't been done justice fully, in my opinion. And as much as I like how his casting was colorblind, they could, if they wanted to, tie the character into the bigger picture of the MCU and establish a family relation between him and Kamala Khan, aka Miss Marvel. Say that she is his niece or something. People already speculated before that Abhilash from WandaVision, who also appeared in Agatha All Along, could have been related to Kamala too. Jay Ali is of Pakistani descent, so even though connecting him as family to Kamala wouldn't be intentional, it could still work. And lastly, there is that Spider-Man connection that we've all been waiting for a follow-up on. As I said in my previous videos about these characters, Matt Murdock was part of the Earth's population whose memory of Peter Parker was erased. But that doesn't mean he never represented the vigilante Spider-Man. Perhaps that's what his memory was altered into, assuring the webhead that there won't be any charges held against him. Does anybody remember 7 Webheads from YouTube back in the day? No? Only me? Well, he was my favorite channel that covered Spider-Man stuff on YouTube, and he has a video from 10 years ago covering the fan theory about how the penultimate episode of Daredevil Season 1 could have had a Spider-Man Easter egg in it. Whether or not it was intended boils down to whether it was ever even meant to lead up to anything, but I'll link that video in the description below along with a couple of other sources. So anyway, since Matt, to his memory, did defend Spider-Man, at the very least, I'd like a passive mention of that. Another thing I said previously is that since we're getting Bullseye back, it would be a cool retcon to show that he was the one who threw the brick at Spider-Man, since it was thrown with such accuracy, right at the intended target. That could be the very first scene of the show, recontextualizing Matt's memory after Doctor Strange's second spell. The scene could show that Spider-Man is sitting there in his suit. Even though Matt's blind, from his senses he would know that it's a masked vigilante he's sitting with at the table instead of a person in civilian's clothing. Since Kingpin is a villain of both Spidey's and Daredevil's, and as I said before, Kingpin shouldn't be a one-and-done villain. His character arc as an adversary should be followed up between the Spider-Man movies and Daredevil seasons. Spider-Man and Daredevil already crossed paths in the Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man cartoon. Daredevil is played by Charlie Cox again, lending his voice, which I dig, but it's an alternate universe not taking place in the main MCU Sacred Timeline. I already talked about how MCU Spider-Man 4 should feature Daredevil in a team-up against Kingpin, and since Daredevil Season 4 is coming before MCU Spider-Man 4, maybe the end of this season could set that up in some way, shape, or form. I also previously mentioned that Kingpin is being treated as the street-level Thanos, so he definitely deserves the big screen treatment. We are only 3 days away from the first episodes of Season 4. If I continue to cover Daredevil as a topic after the series is released, I'll probably stick to referring to the continuation appropriately as Daredevil Born Again, just to avoid any future confusion. Still, since it literally is a continuation and a sequel series, for now, I think it is still okay to refer to it as Season 4. And that's pretty much it. If you watched this video all the way to the end, thanks again. Please leave a comment below letting me know how hyped you are about the Daredevil show. And until next time, holla at your boy.